Tzedek organization. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Sure. I'm Marcia Davis. I'm the co-director of Social Justice Leadership and Community Engagement.
And I'm Heather Talley, also the co-director of Social Justice Education and Community Engagement.
And there's many questions that you send, and also we want to know, and we'll come back after the intro. There's been joyful in the community because two members of the different organizations have been granted with a prize. So starting from that point, some people was asking, what is Tzedek? So, and that's the reason we're sitting out here. So could you please explain to our community what is Tzedek?
Sure. Well, I'll start. The full name of our fund is the Amy Mandel Katina Rodas Fund. And we provide funding for social justice efforts, nonprofits, and grassroots organizations that are involved in our three focal areas: racial justice, LGBTQ rights, and combating anti-Semitism. Now, Tzedek is the name for one of the programs that the fund has put on in the past. And so some people may have heard of the Tzedek Social Justice Fellowship. But right now that fellowship is on a pause, and we are actually just taking feedback from our community about the best way to use funds to support social justice efforts in Asheville moving forward. And the Tzedek Brilliance Awards is one of those experiments. We heard feedback from the community saying, please fund our community leaders. We need more money to do the work that we've been doing for free that's actually helping Asheville to thrive. And the Brilliance Awards were just created from that feedback. So it's one of the pilot programs that we're putting out into the community to experiment different ways of supporting the efforts that are happening here in Asheville.
And what is the history behind Tzedek?
So Amy Mandel and Katina Rodas founded the fund in 1991 to resource organizations internationally, nationally, and regionally. And over the last year, one of the big shifts in our organization is that we're increasingly moving our focus away from the national and certainly the international, more towards Asheville. So we're asking ourselves, how do we invest more resources here locally to have deeper impact? And so one of the things that we're doing in this pause for the cause, as we're calling it, is building deep relationships, both with organizations and leaders that we already have relationships with, but we're also starting to ask ourselves, who do we not have relationships with? And starting to really welcome and invite reach outs from the community so that we can start to get to know what other people are working on and doing to sort of create a more just Asheville.
Funding, it's a key in the organization and the movement for the social justice. So how do your organization is funding the efforts in the community?
So prior to this pause for the cause, I mean, most of the funding decisions were actually made the way that funding decisions are made at any family foundation, meaning Amy Mandel was kind of, putting feelers out into the community, hearing the good work that's been going on, and funding organizations based on her understanding. What we're realizing is that isn't the best way for us to see all the efforts that are happening in Asheville that need our support. And so we're moving more towards trust-based philanthropy and more community-engaged philanthropy. So what that means for us is understanding that just because the fund is the one with the resources doesn't mean that we have all the answers that our community needs. So we're trying to move to a process where we are trusting leaders in the community to tell us what solutions are best needed here in Asheville, and then moving money towards and funding towards those organizations. So we're still in the middle of a transition of looking at exactly how that's going to roll out, but at least now our pilot programs, like we said before, are an experiment in those things. So one of those pilot programs are the Tzedek Impact Awards, and those offer $100,000 to $3,000 for community leaders to support their skill development and professional development. Again, for us, this is an example of trust-based philanthropy because we're essentially letting the community leaders decide for themselves what the best use for that money is, as opposed to saying, here's a conference that we know is really great, you should go for this conference. The idea is maybe you know some resources that we haven't heard of before that that you actually need to make you a better leader in this community. So we're trusting that you'll have the best ideas around how to use those funds. Another pilot program that we've launched is called the Tzedek Equity Learning Circle. And that's actually funding for nonprofits instead of for individuals. It's $50,000 for organizations. The awardees are the YWCA of Asheville, Our Voice, the JCC Jewish Community Center, and
the Center for Participatory
yes,
Change.
And the Center for Participatory Change. And that funding is going towards funding hopefully some out-of-the-box ideas that they'll have to address what equity needs they have within their organization, changing their internal culture. And then the other pilot program is the one that folks have been hearing about lately, the Tzedek Brilliance Awards.
I mean, one of the things that we've heard a lot is that grant makers create cumbersome processes, and that people actually need to focus on doing the work rather than writing grant applications and reporting back to funders about what they're doing. So what we're trying to do is to really simplify our processes and to make it as easy as possible to access funds. The other big piece that we know to be true is that we don't have the answers. That impacted people have the answers. And so this idea of no strings attached funding is a way of saying, here are the resources, here are the dollars, use them the way that you know these dollars need to be spent. So those represent two pretty enormous shifts in terms of how we're working as an organization. I would say the third big shift is that inviting community to the table to actually make decisions about grants. So this big announcement about the Brilliance Award is exciting for the two winners, but it's also exciting for us as an organization because what it demonstrates is that we're increasingly looking to people in the community to actually make the decisions about what individuals, organizations need to be resourced and how. And so we're increasingly sort of, what's the word, like,
I think the big thing is that we're bringing more voices to the table, and we're not assuming that we should have all the power at that table, right? So for the community the selection process for the Brilliance Awards was actually both Heather and I were on the committee. Amy Mandel was not. I mean, and that was an indication of her, how much she trusted the community to make the right choice, or to make the right choice for them. And then we had three other community members at the table, and it was very important for us that we had more community members in the group than we had staff members. The idea being that if there's a tiebreaker, or if there's weight needed to go more on one side than the other, then the idea is that the community needs to have more voice than we do in this process. And the three women, the three people who were there were women of color who are involved in social justice efforts, have roots and bases in Asheville, two of whom also identify as queer women of color. And just checking off the boxes and demographics does not tell you everything you need to know about who these community members are. But we're sharing that just as an indication that for us it's just a start. That we went from just having these decisions at our fund being made by one person to realizing that we are not doing everything that Asheville needs to do if only one person has decision-making power. That if we really say that we want to support Asheville's social justice community, that means that we have to support their wisdom and trust that they need to be part of the decision-making process. So for us, that was having the community involved this time around is just an inkling of how we want to move forward. And we know that as we continue to grow and as we go through this transition, that we are going to open up more opportunities for the community to be a part of deciding how these funds get distributed in Asheville.
So in your contact with the community, in like them participate in your decisions, what other things have you discovered in the process?
I think the biggest thing, and I know I just jumped in, so feel free to cut me off, but I think I think the thing that we've learned the most is how much we don't know. That we continue to educate, and I think this happens across like any relationships between institutions and grassroots leaders in Asheville, is that no matter how many conversations we've had and no matter how many times you invite people to the table, that if you're setting the table so that it's set up by the institution where the community only gets 1, 2, or 3 seats at the table, you're not getting the fullness of the expertise that's in the community, but you're also not setting up an equal relationship. You're also not setting up a relationship where the community understands that the table is being set not just for them, but by them as well. And we know that we're very far from being able to say that the table we're setting is made by the community. But what has really shown up for us from the research is realizing that that the burden is on us to increase opportunities for us to be in right relationship with the community, and that the way that we have been doing things in the past, but also that the way that most nonprofit institutions, government institutions have been working in the past with the community is just not enough. So if we're saying that we really want to shift the power dynamic in Asheville, we have to start with us and shift the power dynamic that is involved here in our own organization.
I would say another big lesson is that we often talk about community as if it's one solid thing. And we even do that when we talk about parts of the community. So we talk about the Latinx community or the Black community. And one of the big learnings that's emerging in terms of being in conversation with people throughout Asheville is that there are multiple communities in Asheville and that the needs are different, even within parts of the community that we think of as somehow the same. And so one of the challenges for us is how do we create funding streams that actually meet different needs? So in many ways, the pilot programs, the Brilliance Awards, for example, are great for individual leaders who are in deep need of, in some ways, back pay for the work that they've been doing in the community, but not necessarily a great fit for community organizations. And so then how do we create grant making that funds community organizations in ways that allow for them to make equally deep impacts? So I think we're just sitting with this idea that there's multiple experiences in Asheville. There's multiple strategies to get at social justice in Asheville. There's people working in all different kinds of ways, and that those ways are valuable and that we need to respond accordingly.
So, keep talking about that point that listens to the community. One of the things that people was asking us is, how can I get a seat on the table? So how can I be heard? Especially, so friends in South Asheville, so East Asheville, so people that are not participating continually in organizations that can represent them. Is there any way that they to be listened?
God.
Yeah, I think that was actually one of the points that came up in our research. Is we realized that sure, there are some community organizations that we have great relationships with, but there are gaps in our understanding and gaps of us being able to see all the amazing work that's happening in Asheville. So one of the things that we invite people to do is definitely reach out to us via our website or via email, info@mandelrotisfund.org. And especially if you're involved in community work, and reach out and let's have a coffee date or a tea date and tell us what's going on in your segment of the neighborhood. We are going to have, again, as we continue to go through this transition process, this is the first step of us listening to the community. And we have a group of trusted advisors that have been working very closely with us. But again, what we've realized through that process is there are so many voices who aren't at that table, like you said. So as we develop more community-oriented processes in the future, we're going to be making more opportunities for folks to come in to the process. But right now, the first step is just reach out and let us know what your work is.
One exciting piece of news is that we have an opportunity for people that we've never funded before to access funds. So if you go to our website, under the Pilot Programs tab, you'll see a link for the Tzedek Impact Awards. And that's an opportunity for individuals who don't have a relationship with currently to apply for a grant of $100 to $3,000 to use in ways that are most useful to them. And so we're excited about that, in part because that's a way that we're going to learn about lots of what's happening in Asheville that we don't currently know about. So we highly encourage people to apply. The process is very simple. And so it's not a cumbersome application process at all. It's also not a selection process. So as long as you meet our criteria, there's a 3-part checklist. It's on our website. You will get awarded the funds. And we're going to dispense those awards until the funds run out. So that's a great way for people to start to develop that relationship with us.
So one more thing. Last year, so we thank you to the Tzedek organization. We were invited to participate in a gift conference, and we got a chance to talk with Edgar Villanueva. So like Decolonizing wealth.
Yes.
And so part of in that conversation that you can see is in our Facebook page. So we were talking about how the money is sometimes, or the funding is sometimes reproducing the structures of power that. So how is in your work you encounter that affirmation, true or not?
Definitely true.
I mean, I think there's no way for you to be in the field of philanthropy and to especially the field of philanthropy that's also social justice philanthropy, to not see the ways in which the fact that one family can accumulate enough wealth to be able to give to other community members is a result of inequity. And I think that that's something that we as a team talk about all the time. The reality is that we love to believe that everyone who earns money and accumulates wealth, that they're doing it based on their own merit or their own bootstraps. But we're very aware that there are some unequal systems that allow some people to get to accumulate wealth more than others. So when we were thinking about like the future of the fund, we talk all the time about Decolonizing Wealth. We have read that book, and we talk all the time about emergent strategy and voices that we're hearing on the ground. But what we really talk about is the idea that this money is not ours, in the sense that the way that capitalism and white supremacy work, they have placed these funds kind of more in our hands. But that part of our responsibility in trying to build the world that we want to see is we need to redistribute that wealth. Now, there are a lot of strategies out there in terms of how to do that, and the question we're engaging in is how do we best want to redistribute wealth? But it's definitely something we are very aware of, is the only reason that philanthropy even exists is because we have a capitalist society that allows one portion of our country to gain more wealth than another portion. And we're just trying to do our part in redistributing and equalizing that access to wealth.
I mean, I think a part of our culture that is emerging is telling the truth. And one of the truths is that this community and in so many communities, there is so much brilliance, and that resources, money has been hoarded in the groups, in the hands of a few, at the expense of many. And so telling that truth when we're having staff meetings in the middle, as a foundation, is an ugly truth, but it's absolutely necessary for us to start to really think about how to move this money. Marcia and I joke all the time that really that's our job. Our job is to move money and to think creatively about the barriers that have been created to prevent us from doing that. To move that money with as much ease as possible, to move that money with the least amount of control as possible, to move that money with as much respect for leaders who know exactly how to use that money. And so to really stop relying on these myths that redistributing the money means we're doing something good. I feel like what we're doing is repair work. We're not doing charity work. We're not good people because we're doing this. We are doing the work of repairing a deep and profound harm that has been built into our society. So naming those things, like as a team, as staff of a family foundation, is really important in terms of reconciling like what it is that we're actually doing. I think the other thing too is that we're trying to think outside the box about how this gets done. So the status quo way of grant making has in some ways just kept power where power lives, kept resources where power lives. And so if we're really talking about redistributing resources and redistributing power, we have to get creative about what that looks like. And so we don't think that we have the answers quite yet, but we're certainly on the journey to figure out a more healing and transformative way to do this work.
And these pilot programs are really a way of inviting other philanthropists to be in the conversation with us. Especially when we think about the Brilliance Awards, there are so many times when people think of an award as somehow being money that you're giving to someone with the hope that in the next few years they will use that money in a way that impacts Asheville. And we know that we've heard that question of, well, how are you going to hold them accountable to using the money to help Asheville, when they're really asking the wrong question. I think the question that needs to be asked is, how did we allow Asheville to be a place where so many community leaders are working so hard to make sure that Asheville is a just place for all of us to thrive, and yet they don't get compensated. They're never really given attention to. They're invited to the table that nonprofits have or that we have on the civic level, but they're usually invited to the table in a way that's just here we want you for 90 minutes during our equity conversation, but you don't really have any power making, right? You don't really have any decision making power. So the reality is, just like Heather said, these awards are actually repair. They're saying these are back pay for the amount of years that members in our community have been working to make Asheville a just place for everyone to thrive, but they've been doing it without a salary, they've been doing it without paid time off, they've been doing it without benefits.
Without secure housing.
And without secure housing.
Without health care. Without safety in lots of ways. So the amount of risk that leaders have incurred to create a community that benefits everyone is immense, and we have to reconcile that fact.
Right. So I mean, and I think it's important to note that is that this isn't us doing any great feat of funding, right? I mean, the all we're doing is essentially honoring the rules of a capitalist society, in the sense of saying so many people have produced things that have made our community a healthier place to be, and we are providing them with the pay that they should have had already. So for us, in terms of no strings attached funding, part of that has to do with trust, but also part of it has to do with us trying to be in right relationship with the leaders in this community. And what it means to be in right relationship is it's not appropriate to ask folks who have dedicated their lives to Asheville to prove to us even more why they deserve money. I mean, the reality is that the burden of proof is on us to explain why we have not given them this money before. Why have we as a community not supported them financially for actually being able to do the work of helping our communities to thrive? I think, Asheville is a community that has a strong reputation for being a liberal community, yet at the same time, we see these inequities that are existing between white middle-class members of our community and those who are marginalized and disenfranchised. And we have to ask ourselves, especially folks with power and especially people with resources, is how do we redistribute our resources in a way that actually helps to narrow these gaps, but also acknowledge that while we've been building systems to increase those gaps, the only reason a lot of those gaps have even become closer has to do with the unpaid free work that happens on the side that we never acknowledge. So as much as folks want to say that what we're doing with the Brilliance Awards is bold, I actually think it's actually just the basic apology that you tell your kindergartner when if you take something from someone else, then maybe you should give it back. And so what we're saying is that this is a basic human relationship that we as funders want to have with the rest of our community, just to be in right relationship with the people that we say that we value.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the answer of my question about the winners. So well deserved. So shout outs to Nicole Towson and Shanae Smith. There was big concepts that in this few minutes, like redistribution, charity, and it deserves a second conversation because we ran out of time, but we'll be back. If you're watching this video, please send us some more questions for our next interview. I hope you can let us having a second one.
Of course, yeah, having these conversations. Yeah,
let's keep talking and be in touch.
Yes.
And be in touch. So, anything before we say bye to our community viewers?
Sure. Well, I actually just want to appreciate you for amplifying the voices in our community and letting us be part of the conversation. And just say that there was so much more brilliance than we could even begin to award with the Brilliance Awards. We all know that there's more than 2 people in our community who are making change. So we invite, if there are any funders who are interested in what our process is or want to somehow support this type of effort in the future, definitely reach out and get in contact with us.
We have a contact page on our website, and people can also reach out to us at info@mandelrotusfund.org. And we'd encourage people to apply for those impact awards. We'd love to see new names. Yep.
Well, we gotta say bye. See you in the next program, and thank you very much for watching.